powered by the political teams of the Washington Post and Newsweek magazine. This is The Political Take, a weekly web video election report online and in real time. Here now, Chris Cillizza and John Meacham.
I'm Chris Cillizza of WashingtonPost.com.
And I'm Dan Klaidman with Newsweek.
And welcome to The Political Take, our weekly roundup and look forward of the political news you need to know. Dan, first and foremost, today, Bill Richardson, to the surprise of, I think, almost no one, will be named Commerce Secretary. Any thought on Richardson coming back to Washington after 6 or 7 years out in New Mexico as a governor?
Yeah. He's been governor for 7 years in New Mexico. He's a man of action, and he wanted to get back into the game in Washington. He would have preferred to have been Secretary of State, but I think he'll be happy with Commerce Secretary. And if past his prologue, Bill Richardson, there's a good chance he'll move around within this administration as well. Remember, he held several posts in the Clinton administration: Energy Secretary, Ambassador to the UN, and my guess is at some point he'll be involved in diplomacy as well. That's one of his fortes.
Yeah, I think he's trying to ensure that he wins the longest resume in Washington.
That's right.
Because he's had just about every job, and commerce will be another one. The other big piece of news out there today is Saxby Chambliss reelected to a second term. He won very convincingly, 57-43, in a runoff over Jim Martin, a Democratic legislator. Republicans, Dan, are trying to spin this as the first election of 2010, a sign that without Obama on the ticket, Democrats are not nearly as strong. What's your take? Is this the last race of 2008 or the first race of 2010?
I think that it's a little early for this particular race to be really meaningful. It is interesting that the margin before the runoff was 3%, and then he won, as you said, very convincingly. I think that speaks more to Barack Obama's strength than Saxby Chambliss's in the Republicans some ways. Barack Obama had real coattails. But it was the presidential election, the one that really counted for the base of the Democratic Party. So they came out when Barack Obama was on the ticket. They didn't turn out when he was not on the ticket.
And one other interesting point there is there was some pressure from some within the Democratic Party that Barack Obama make a personal appearance. Remember, in 1992 we had a runoff in Georgia, Weish-Fowler against Paul Coverdale. Bill Clinton, the newly elected Democratic president, went down there. Paul Coverdale, the Republican, wound up winning anyway. I think that the margin, that 14 or 13-point margin, justifies Obama staying away. He might have helped a point or two, but he wasn't going to win this for Jim Martin. So I think it looks smart in retrospect. Anyway, moving on to the transition to power, of course, the big story in Washington, Barack Obama setting up his cabinet. Dan, we now have the economic team, the national security team. We have Bill Richardson, as we talked about. Now that we have a little bit more complete picture, I think it's worth at least looking at the idea of what kind of presidency and cabinet Barack Obama is putting into place. George Bush famously put into place sort of a very strong executive with a relatively weak cabinet. What's your sense of the dynamic here? Obviously, Senator Clinton, as Secretary of State, is a pretty strong, willed, independent force over there at the State Department. But what's your take on the interaction that we're likely to expect between Obama, President Obama, and his cabinet?
Well, the choices are fascinating, and I think it goes right to the heart of that question that you pose. It's still early days, so it's hard to know exactly what the balance of power is going to look like between the White House and the cabinet agencies. On the other hand, as you say, Barack Obama has put some pretty strong-willed personalities in his cabinet. Hillary Clinton, Bob Gates, who's quiet but very willful. And I think there is at least the possibility that this suggests that he's going to be, he's going to be a delegator. He's going to allow policy to be made in these agencies, as opposed to in all power residing in the White House. The interesting question, and you can overdo the Lincoln parallels, but one theme that comes up when you talk to people about Barack Obama is he has this quality that he believes Lincoln had, which is sort of the humility and strength, the confidence to be humble. Now, he is going to be ultimately, he says he'll be the guy who makes the choices in the end, but he is confident enough and a strong enough character himself to be able to deal with all of these strong personalities in his cabinet, listen to them, and not be in any way threatened by strong positions that come from outside the White House. Time will tell, but those are the early signs.
Well, and certainly, just from a purely symbolic and visual perspective, the idea that Barack Obama would pick his longtime presidential rival, Hillary Clinton, as in one of the, arguably, if not the most, certainly one of the most important cabinet posts, speaks to exactly what you're talking about, Dan, this idea that Obama, in his mind's eye, sees himself as someone who is big enough to welcome in people because they are qualified and to put political entanglements aside. Whether that ultimately works out for him or not, I think remains to be seen, but it's a fascinating, I think, early development.
The hope is, Chris, that should help make better policy, because if you are not cutting out the departments and these kinds of big decisions are not being made by a small group of people inside the White House who aren't listening to other people, then they will avoid big mistakes that in the end came to haunt the Bush administration.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we will be there. Folks, stay tuned. Dan and I will be back next Wednesday for the latest and greatest of the political world. That's it for me. Signing off. I'm Chris Cillizza.
And I'm Dan Klaidman. Thanks for joining us.